Okay, here is our interview with Peter Janney. Obviously, we're going to dig into a lot of the details of the book. And Mary, is it Pinchot Meyer?
Yes, it's
Okay,
French, Pinchot.
Pinchot Meyer. But I thought maybe a good place to start, and then it'll lead us into that, is to start by you just telling us, in your view, based on all your research, who killed John F. Kennedy and why.
Um, I would say unquestionably, after studying this for more than 20 years, that John F. Kennedy was assassinated by the national security state of the United States of America. And that would include the CIA, the military, those people.
And am I right? It's been a while since I've seen Oliver Stone's movie, but isn't that kind of Oliver Stone's conclusion also?
Yes, to a very large degree, it is. Yep. And I think, in my opinion, Oliver Stone should be commended. I think he is a courageous artist, and he has unswervingly given the public the closest picture to what really happened in his movie JFK, even though people try and come along and lambast him day in and day out, year in, year out. Uh, Believe me, I grew up with the CIA. My father was in the CIA. He was part of the cover up of the CIA's involvement in the Kennedy assassination. I speak from a certain vantage point that many people do not have. So all I can do is just give you my truth. And after just an enormous amount of study over a number of period of years, I think the evidence is overwhelming.
Talk just briefly about your father. And also, I'd like to know, what was his opinion if he ever shared it with you?
Well, anyone who worked for the CIA back in the 1950s or 60s isn't going to tell you the truth. They're going to tell you what they want you to believe.
Even your own father?
Even my own father, yeah. And you know, um, I I grew to, in some ways, really respect my father. I mean, he exhibited a profound amount of courage uh, during World War II. He was a aircraft carrier pilot on the new Grumman Avenger torpedo bomber. He, for lack of a better way to put it, looked up death's ass on many occasions and came back to tell about it. Won the Navy Cross, second only to the Congressional Medal of Honor, and came back a hero, frankly. And I think a lot of men in his generation and his social class, a lot of which they didn't have to work because they were from very well-to-do families, but they wanted to, make a difference in the world. They wanted to serve their country. So my dad was, at the inception of the CIA when it was launched in 1947. He didn't start there until 1948, but that was his career, and he made the most of it.
And would you say he was high up in the CIA?
Very high up. Yeah.
And when you were a boy, did you know he was in the CIA?
Yes. We knew he was in the CIA. That didn't mean he could tell us very much.
Right.
But
So there's secret agents in the CIA that you don't know, but your father was a higher up, and it was known he's working in the CIA.
Right. But you have to remember, in the 1950s and the early 60s, I mean, we thought our father, being a CIA brat, we thought our father was just like James Bond. And of course, that's what they wanted you to believe. He wasn't, but he loved Ian Fleming and his books. He read them all. We would go to the James Bond movies as a family, and have a grand old time.
Well, I wish I could show you around my house right now, but you would see about much to my wife's chagrin, about 10 original James Bond posters hanging in my house. So my father raised me a big James Bond fan,
Uh-huh.
though he wasn't in the CIA. So do you believe that your father was involved in any way or knowledgeable in any way in advance?
I would doubt that very seriously. An operation like the assassination of JFK was a very, what's called compartmentalized operation. Very few people knew about it. It was totally on a need to know basis. And my father was not in the covert action division of the CIA, even though I think there were times where, in fact, I know there were times where he was involved in certain operations, but of course, he was never really able to talk about them. Sometimes when he had too much to drink, he would let the cat out of the bag a little bit, but you could never really corner him very much on what he might have mentioned.
Well, yeah, just to tie a bow on that, what's the most that he ever said to you about JFK's assassination?
Well, in terms of the real truth about it, he said very little. I mean, he wanted us to believe that, it was Lee Harvey Oswald and he was the lone nut assassin, and, all that gibberish, which it was. But, when Jim Garrison in the late 1960s was bringing the case back into the legal system and, he was going after this guy, Clay Shaw, my father was running, a desk inside the CIA where they were trying to thwart Jim Garrison's investigation at every corner. And of course, there had been documents released, since the early 1990s that my father signed that I had in my possession that substantiate that. So, that was huge from my point of view. And, without just giving you a teaser, the woman that I write about in my book, Mary Pinchot Meyer, of course, was a very dear friend of my family's. She and my mother went to college together. She and her former husband, Cord Meyer, worked in the CIA. He was very close with my father. And, in my book, I bring to light how my father was part of the conspiracy to murder this woman because of what she was about to do.
So before we dig into Mary, just a quick tie off on the other thing. So you said NSA/CIA. Bottom line, why did they want Kennedy dead?
They wanted Kennedy dead because he wasn't willing to toe the line. He had his own idea of where this country should go. And particularly that idea had to do, starting in late 1962, early 1963, after the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 62, JFK realized that the Cold War mentality was a dead end. And he was much more concerned, he became much more concerned with efforts at peace, at world peace specifically. And so he began to take the reins into his own hands as to begin to steer the country away from Cold War mentality toward a new vision of leading our country and the rest of the world into the possibilities of peace. And that's essentially was what his speech, his very famous speech at the American University commencement address on June 10th, 1963 was about.
And just what was the essence of that speech?
Well, the essence of it was that he really challenged people to come to terms with what their prejudices were against Russia, and other, nation states that were anti-U.S., and to help understand that what peace would require from each of us.